Hey guys, I'm Trixi, aka The Thoughtful Beast. Welcome to our live show. I'm here today with Dr. Mama Grace, as she puts on her Instagram. She's here today to talk about hip hop appreciation versus appropriation. But before we get to that, Grace, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, I am really honored and grateful to be here. I do want to start out before to recognize and do a land acknowledgement. I want to recognize that we are on Kumeyaay land. And at this moment, during this time, our Kumeyaay brothers and sisters are fighting against a wall being put up on their sacred lands. And so there's been a lot of protests that are happening out there. So I just want to take this time to really think about the ways that we can support them and also really understand what it means to be on this land, to work and to live and to benefit. And I have some information if you want to follow and see what's going on. On Instagram, you can follow Kumeyaay Defense Against the Wall, and on Facebook, it's Warriors of Awareness Topics. You can follow either of those to be updated, and also learning the ways that you can support the community out there. Just a little bit about myself. As Trixi said, I'm Dr. Mama Grace, or I have been very humbly and sweetly named Mama Grace by the young people of Transcendence Youth Arts, who I have been able to work with for over 10 years. I am an educator, I'm a mother, I'm a scholar, I'm an activist, an organizer. I teach at UCSD, which is where I met Trixi. I also teach at San Diego City College and SDSU, and then also again with Transcendence Youth Arts. I'm the founder and director of BK Soul Performance Company, where I work with spoken word poets and live musicians, really using hip hop as a frame, but making work that means something to us and that really addresses topics of injustice and what's going on in the world. I am currently researching and do research in hip hop performance, and mostly just trying to raise our two beautiful children with the thoughtfulness and awareness that needs to be in our world right now. So a little bit about me. Yeah.
Yay! It's great to have you, and what an awesome time to be like a teacher and like an activist, and how those things are so powerful together. Like just like listening to you and be like, oh, like obviously I know you're a teacher, you were my teacher, but like hearing you and hearing, you know, like your 10 years of Transcendence, like all your years at colleges, you know, and the fact that like I invited you because in my brain, when I think of hip hop, I think of your hip hop class where you taught us the history of hip hop. And that was like the first time I was ever taught that hip hop was not just like a musical genre, like, which I think my brother knew, and I don't know why he didn't tell me. Like, whatever. Oh, he's a break dancer, that's why. And I'm just like, how could, whatever. But you know, like, but that was really important. Like, I had no idea. So you know, that must be really great that you have that honor and you get to actually like talk about these things that are important, not just in the dance world, but just like the world in general.
Yeah, I feel like I'm really blessed to be where I am in terms of being an educator, but also doing something that I love doing, which is dance, and specifically hip hop. And I think you don't get all classes that will teach you the context or the history. But for me, it's really important to learn the context of a movement style that you're learning, or at least from like why I come to the place that I am, and really understanding my position and my place in it at all. You know, I'm a Korean American. I have been blessed to grow up in a world where hip hop was growing and changing, and really learning about myself through hip hop. And so I feel like it is my responsibility to give some of that back, to do the education and constantly educate myself, but also ask my students to really figure out for themselves how it makes sense. Like, I can't tell you how to do it or what to do. You have to find your own path. And I think so much about hip hop is that individualness, not individual in that I am going to distance myself from the community, but really finding about who you are and grounding yourself and not becoming just one of the many, right? It's about what your style is, what's your voice, how do you present yourself? That's the way I see hip hop. So.
And when did hip hop come into your life?
Oh, like the 80s, right? A long time. I'm dating myself. I tell all my students I'm 28. But I'm not. It was in the 80s, and you know, like you start to hear it on the radio a little bit. But I'm like, one memory I have is in 7th grade. My best friend who ended up being my best friend, she moved to our school, and she introduced me to this AM radio station, K-Day, in Los Angeles, and this is where I heard things that I had never heard. I also religiously watch Soul Train every Saturday. So I'm watching dance, I'm hearing the music, and this is how I'm getting a lot of my introduction to hip hop. And then obviously, as it got more commercial, like being able to access it in different ways. But if you can imagine this is my daughter, a young Korean American girl, growing up pretty conservative too, that I would fall in love with something like hip hop. It seems odd, I would say. Like, I don't think it's odd, but someone could look at my life and be like, "Well, that's really interesting. I would have never projected you to fall in love with hip hop."
And why do you think you fell in love with hip hop, and like to such an extent where like, this is your area of study?
Yeah. For me, the way I understand it, it allowed me to really figure out who I was without judgment. And in a way to break some of the stereotypes of my own culture. Being an Asian American, Korean American, you're supposed to be quiet, you're demure. It's very paternalistic or patriarchal, right? So the woman stays in the house, the woman is quiet, the woman defers to the man. Especially in Korean culture, you're as a mother, you would be known as not your own name, but your firstborn son's mother. So I would be known as my young son's mother, not Grace. So everything kind of being patriarchal, and I was never someone to fall in line. I always tried to find an outside way of doing something to challenge whatever system I was a part of. And so hip hop allowed me to really just sit in that place and be me. I was always a mover. I didn't start really dancing. Well, I took my first training of a trained dance class was in college, but I always loved moving. I was an athlete. I loved sports. I was a gymnast, and I always had to move. My parents knew that. Oh, I guess my first introduction to dance was like traditional Korean fan dancing that every kid does. But I loved moving, and then watching Soul Train and religiously watching the Fly Girls on In Living Color, which was a comedy sketch in the 90s where they had the dancers come out and do a little sequence. Like that's what I wanted to do.
That's where Jennifer Lopez came out.
Yes, that's where J-Lo made her thing. And who knows, maybe if I would have made it on the Fly Girls, I would be somewhere else now. But I got to college and I was like, okay, if I want to be a Fly Girl, I'm going to have to take a dance class and train myself. And then they canceled the show. So there was no Fly Girl path for me.
Oh yeah. I always think that show lasted longer than it did, but that's just because like my brother would watch it on rerun.
Right.
That's how I knew it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And how? I mean, I can see you as a Fly Girl.
I don't know, like, because a lot of it too was based in jazz technique, and I had none at that time. Like doing turns. Oh yeah, that I don't know how that would have worked out for me.
Can't even pull off a single and jump out of it. It's
yeah, right. Fake the double pirouette.
That's awesome. I didn't know you were a gymnast, so that was a cool thing to learn about you. For me, I grew up listening to rap and R&B mainly because like my brother's older than me. You know, when you have an older sibling and he's like 5 years older than me, like you just kind of end up doing what they do because I didn't really. Yeah, so like that was my first like introduction into the culture, and then again, like I said, like my brother was a break dancer. So like, yeah, you know, I actually like, even before I knew they were, I was just like, oh, I'm listening to Afro Mabata, I'm listening to DJ Herc. Like I'm listening to these people, and just being a kid, which was cool. And then when I got older, I was never a break dancer, but you know, hip hop started to change. Hip hop dance or different, I don't really know how to phrase it, like a more choreographed style of hip hop came out, right? Was getting more popular. And when I found that, that really hit me. Kind of just like along with like the same things like that you were talking about, you know, like being Asian and being supposed to be being demure. And the fact that I was never that, and I had my own issues a lot growing up with being like, am I girly? Am I not girly? Like, what am I supposed to be? And then when I found hip hop dance, and, you know, a lot of it was very like high energy, like, and being strong was like a very good thing. You know, like I had like strong arms, like I naturally had muscle and stuff that like, you know, my father was like, guys don't like girls with muscle. Like, what are you doing? And then when I found hip hop, I was like, but this is good for that. Like, this makes sense for me with that. And like, so I guess like for me, like that's how I got more into at least like hip hop dance, which is why I took your class when I got older, like in college, which was my first introduction to any sort of breakdancing, like myself. Doing it myself.
Even though your brother has been doing it for a while, yeah.
You know, you have siblings and they're like, this is my thing. Like, yeah. Because he also played DDR and he would never let me on that DDR pad. So like, you know, like those things that was a sibling thing, but yeah, that you were my first introduction to like that kind of hip hop. And then again, like the actual culture of hip hop and it being a culture. So
well, I think too, because when you think about hip hop, like now it's what, almost 50 years old. But when you're talking about the 90s or 80s, it's still kind of forming. It's at least in the terms of it being global or commercialized or out other than the radio. You think about music, it being specifically at the time being able to be packaged, so it can be consumed just over the radio, and you don't have to pay for anything, right? You just have to have a radio. Well, you have to have a radio, but that you're hearing music that's being played over the radio. But in terms of like a dance class, or like for us, we didn't have cable TV, so the way that we could even watch music videos of groups, we didn't have MTV. And I'm trying to remember what the one thing was called where we could watch like a few videos on Saturday. I can't remember at the time, but it was like, oh my God, let's go watch the few music videos that are going to happen. Then you try to like learn the choreography, the backup dance choreography of whatever group, like the minimal choreography that existed, or even like Janet Jackson when she, you know, I'm Michael Jackson too, right? But Janet Jackson, Remember the Time video, like the choreography coming out. So you're getting more and more dance video or dance, I guess music videos that are coming out that have choreography that's a little bit more consumable in that way. Mm-hmm. And then you have something like YouTube, which I'm still kind of baffled when I think about it. It came out in 2005. So like I'm already a grown woman at this point in 2005, but how YouTube is allowing folks to access whatever information, and you don't even have to be in the same city, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a book. I can't even think of it. It'll come to me. But Bakari Kitwana, his argument is that you could have white kids in the suburb access hip hop, learn hip hop through the screen and see it, but not ever come into contact with any Black folks. And so you're learning something without actually engaging in the community that it's coming from, right?
Yeah.
And so this is why, for me, it's important to talk about context, where it comes from, why we need to learn who started it and why. Sorry, apparently it's very important. So I and you gotta like rein me in, because I can start to go off tangents too.
No, I like it. I like hearing about it. No, and that's like, you know, like that's kind of like why I invited you, because especially because hip hop dancing has become so popular now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially, you know, like going to competition, right? Competition dance. And a lot of competition dance, like, it's really expensive to be part of a studio doing like ballet, jazz, tap and everything. Like, it's very expensive if you're competing. Like, that's a lot of money, and usually a lot of the companies, studios that compete, like, they're competing a lot. Like, it's kind of an elitist thing. And then hip hop got popular, and now you see those things like in competition, and it's really interesting because it's not necessarily bad. It's not like, ooh, you're rich and you can't do hip hop. But like you said, it's just like that context is missing. It's like, this is a whole culture.
Well, already when it's taught in a studio, it's different, right? And when it's taught at a university, it's different. So again, you have to think about the situation you're in, and not to say that like it can't be valid or it can't be a real experience, but you have to really understand, like, what does it mean to take hip hop in a studio from somebody who is not from the hip hop community, right? Somebody who learned it from somebody who learned it from somebody now. I think about, like, when I started college, there were no hip hop classes offered anywhere, at least in my knowledge, and definitely not in the college system. And thinking about wanting to do something with hip hop and really struggling with, okay, well, do I try to really dig into this? Like, my first performance on stage was choreographed by two men in the dance department, and it was a hip hop piece. And that was my first experience on stage with that. But we didn't have a class that would support that. And then you're starting to see the studios crop up little by little. And then you're starting to see universities incorporating, or even I would say City College had in the community college system was more open to having it before the university, like UCSD. It took a while. And it not being really treated as a valid art form, right? Because it was like not technical, whatever you want to, well, we all know what that means, right?
Yeah.
But now it's this real popular form that almost is like excessive in the commercial field, right? And that like we had talked, there's just a upcropping of competition teams on college campuses that really draw from hip hop in their work or their choreography. So
yeah, and it was interesting. Like, you know, when I was at UCSD, I was also on like a hip hop team. Like, it's just a normal thing now. And it was interesting because I taught at UCSD's rec for so long, to be like 3 years ago, I had like a student when I was teaching my beginning hip hop class, and they're like talking about all the teams like on campus, you know, because I was like, yeah, I know Ascension, I know 220.
Well, that was it. UCSD had those two, and that was kind of it for a while.
yeah, and then it like blew up, which is cool, and it's great. And then there's also this other side, especially you know, like there are a lot of Asian hip hop dancers in that way, and like especially like obviously SoCal, like a lot of Filipinos. I know a lot of Filipinos. I again was in like that kind of team, and then it being really strange because now everything with BLM having some, you know, knowing some hip hop dancers, like Asian hip hop dancers myself, that you thought, oh, of course it's going to align. We're going to align. Let's go. Like, and then it being like, no, like I don't stand with Black Lives Matter. I'm just like, wait, what? But like, but you are a hip hop, like you yourself are like tout yourself as like a hip hop dancer, and you listen to this music and you dance to it. And it was just really disheartening to be like, oh, this isn't like a, of course thing. Like that was really disheartening for me to realize that it wasn't like that, which is why I was like, let's talk about appreciation versus appropriation, Grace, because it's just something that's, you know, that has happened so recently. And I know, you know, like not everyone's perfect. Like we're all like learning and changing, learning how to actually appreciate the culture versus just like appropriating it. And also just like having a new eye, like a better eye for like what that is. Right. Like I remember I watched Fuller House because I was like, what is this? Right. Because I grew up when Full House is super popular, and like how hip hop is just like in there, like very Disney, but in there because, you know, Disney does do hip hop. Like if you go to their shows, there are things that are like come from hip hop styles, and that's very interesting. But also it's creating also like this weird detachment, or I don't know what to call it, like this weird thing where I guess it's like, I don't know, it's being whitened, I don't know, Americanized, something like that. Those are my words I'm throwing at you.
Well, it's complex. And I don't think there's like a line where you're appreciating and you're appropriating. And it's not like you jump the line and you're doing the other. I think it's much more complex, and it goes back and forth. I would say we all appropriate different cultures at different times. So we have to think about power and how we exercise that power, and like when the appropriation is really harmful. And I'm learning more. Dr. Amani Kai Johnson has an article called Black Culture Without Black People, where she really kind of looks more into looking past appropriation. Because I think when we get there, it sometimes isn't really helpful to sit in that place, because people start to feel guilty or feel really defensive, right? Like, that's not what I intended. I love hip hop or whatever culture you're appropriating. I didn't mean any harm. I'm just enjoying it. I'm not trying to be, you know, X, Y, and Z. But I think there's got to be more of an understanding, and I think some folks be like, oh yeah, we learned the history, so we're good. It's like, no, there's more to do. And my encouragement always is like, how are you contributing to Black culture and the community? How are you contributing to hip hop culture when you yourself are taking? And we talk a lot about being guests in the community. And what does that really mean to be a guest in the community? Do you make decisions when you're a guest at somebody's house? And again, it's complex. If you're a guest at your friend's house, that's different from if you're a guest at a friend of a friend of a friend's house, right? Where you're not comfortable. So I think it's really more helpful to kind of understand like why you are interested in this culture, and what you are taking and what you're giving back. And when you realize that the taking sometimes can be really harmful, really, really harmful, especially when we talk about hip hop and as Asian Americans, when we perpetuate anti-Black racism. So we can be like, oh, we love hip hop, I express myself, it's about me. And then you turn the corner, and then you do something that's anti-Black. but then you don't really understand that what you just did was anti-Black. And I think it's really kind of at the root of things that our system has been rooted in anti-Black racism, and it's really about undoing all those little things. And for someone like me who has been working on this, I still find myself falling into perpetuating anti-Black racism. And I'm lucky that people are around me to call me out or let me know, or that I can take a moment to reflect. But I think right now what we're seeing is people freaking out and being super defensive. Like, I'm not a racist. Like, how many times have you heard that, in the last couple months, right?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be called a racist. But we all perpetuate racism in some way. Like, people can even talk about being part of this capitalist system. We're being anti-Black.
Yeah.
And then I even think about, like, we are in Kumeyaay land, right? And what does that mean? And what are we doing in support of our Kumeyaay brothers and sisters? And I've just had like a little experience recently that is just like, I'm really blown away and really checking myself. So if I go out to a protest, can I check box? Oh, okay, I did that, and how we think about how we participate is I did it today. I'm good. I did my 1 week activism thing. And when we think about how folks live, like, this is lived experience, particularly, Black folks don't get to take a break from this. This is constant. Again, Kumeyaay folks right now are just fighting to have the respect to be able to observe the land and make sure that their ancestors are cared for. But yet we have to build this wall and blow up the land. So it's, again, I feel like I went off on a tangent, but
it's all connected to
just really thinking about when I think so, going kind of back into appropriation and appreciation in my I guess in my classes, when we talk about this, some folks I've had some folks say, well, I'm just here to dance. Like, I'm not trying to like be Black or try to be in the culture. I just want to dance. And so that stance comes from a place of privilege. You get to be at this university, you get to take this class, you get the units for it, you get to learn some of it, and then you get to move on with your life, right? So just that moment of like, I'm not really invested. And again, some people may come into any kind of art form or culture and be like, yeah, that's not really my thing. But I think once you are fully participating, when you are labeling yourself in some ways, like, there comes a lot of responsibility, and not also just like you were saying, you're frustrated with some folks who are not aligning themselves with the Black Lives Matter movement, but there's also a lot of folks that are doing it and not really understanding. They're just adding the hashtag on.
Yeah, and
right?
Yes.
It's performative, right?
Yeah.
Let me just I'll add the hashtag, but there's no real anything beyond that.
Yes.
Right.
But it's also a thing that is happening for sure. And this is why I brought you on to talk about it. Like, honestly, I wanted to talk about it because, like, you're right. Like, going back to what you're talking about, like, like, even the word, like, appropriation, like, has a connotation of someone's doing this to you. Like, you're appropriating that, da, da, da. And it's like, I understand that. And I didn't know how to talk about it without creating that guilt, because I don't think it's helpful. Not that I don't think people should not be held accountable for their actions, but also I don't think doing this is really helpful. Like, making people feel guilty and people working from explicitly just guilt to change their ways isn't really healthy, nor is it probably going to last.
But I will say too, it's like, it's not about coddling either. There are a lot of folks who are super defensive, don't want to feel like the bad person, and want to be coddled into being the good person, or like I do this, I'm a good one, but not wanting to be called out for a lot of the harm that they're doing, you know?
Yeah.
So maybe not, I mean, there's got to be a balance of like not just belittling you, but also like what you're doing is messed up. Not like, oh, it's okay, I know you're trying, let's try better. Like some of that passive stuff is really just perpetuating.
Yes.
Right. The
And
harm.
can I ask you, like, I don't know, give an example. That's really strange. But, you know, like how you approach that. Because I know for me, it's really hard because my initial thing is just like, it wants to, like, initially, I feel like my knee-jerk reaction is to just be like, no. But I also know, like, that's not helpful. And, like, so finding that balance of, like, how do I hold people accountable, you know, without going too far on one side or the other, because I also don't want to enable people, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's what you have to feel out, and what you will understand when you are in a relationship with somebody and you understand how you can operate, right? So sometimes there's a need to generally like shock people into like thinking, because sometimes I think if we're too soft and we're too general, and then people think, oh, she's not talking about me, I'm okay, I'm one of the good ones, right?
Yes.
You know, as opposed to like, I mean, I think there's ways to do it publicly, but I also think there's ways to do it behind closed doors where you actually have a productive conversation. So there's a lot, right? There's a need to do it publicly, to be like, hey, this is what's going on. We're trying to keep you accountable as a public person or a public organization. This is how we feel. Do better. And then there's, you know, someone like your mom. Would you call your mom out on Facebook? Okay, maybe that's a bad example, right? but I really think about, particularly in Asian American communities, and having those difficult conversations with your family members, that if you have a relationship with them and you can actually deeply engage without trying to just fire at each other, and really thinking about your impact, right? What do you want the end impact to be? For them to be defensive and shut down and push you away, or do you want them to actually open up and listen to you and hear you?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that is important. Like knowing how to appropriately, and you know, that goes down to like you said, like feeling your own relationship with this person. Like, you know, this person best, like what is a way, or like organization or person or whatever, like is public the best way? Is it like behind closed doors, like conversation? Is it, I was at this, it was Tagalog for Black Lives, put on by Naista, and some of the people watching, because a lot of the panelists were professors, like at USF and different places, and you know, people in the chat were saying, oh, I sat my grandma next to me, or I'm sitting my parents next to me, and I thought, dang, that's probably going to go a lot better, because you know, like especially like with Asians, it's just when you're younger, it sucks because they're like, you know, go get a good education, da 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 da. But even after you're educated, sometimes your parents don't want to listen to you because they're your parent, you know, the whole hierarchy thing. You listen to your elders, and when I heard that, when I saw that in the chat, I was like, that's so smart though, because these literally are panelists, like they're older, and that just works that works for you, and they're highly educated and they know this. So there's literally just a higher chance because of that they're going to listen.
Yeah, so you really thinking about, it's like a cultural competency, right? Mm-hmm. Understanding your culture and the way information is received. And being, as Asian Americans, we have to honor our elders, right? You don't talk back, you don't challenge. And So how do you have a meaningful conversation that doesn't do all those things, but you also can get the information you want? And so you use a situation where you're like, hey, come listen to this talk. And then you think about, oh yeah, you know, my elders will not maybe respect what I say, but they'll respect the professor, they'll respect the doctor or whoever's
Yeah.
speaking, right? You know, exactly. Exactly. We think about those ways.
It's so true, because in a lot of Asian cultures, and especially Filipino culture, they're like, doctor is top. You know, you have that doctor in front of their name, and they're like, oh, yes. Like,
yes, everything you say is worth something,
yes.
right?
Yes, in that translation. And so, yeah, that's definitely something to think about, which again can always be hard, because you're like, why can't you listen to me when I'm saying the same thing? But like, you know, it's not about you. It's about like the information going through, like setting those priorities and having that understanding. And then like even learning about that, right? Like learning new terms like cultural competency, and what is that? Like intergenerational trauma, and what is that? It's been like it's been like a cool time in that like there's so much information going out there that's so heavily related to what the Black community is going through, like for example, like intergenerational trauma, but also it's like, look how that applies to also like your culture. Look how that applies to even just like American culture, right? Intergenerational trauma, people come home from the Vietnam War, they're not mentally healthy. How did that affect their children, and how does that affect you as the grandchildren? Like what things were passed down, like with epigenetics or just behavioral patterns.
Yeah.
And then applying that to like, well, if you know that can be really messed up, like just thinking about how did that work with slavery, you know, and that's like hundreds of years.
Yeah, and that's not even just the emotional and physical trauma. You think about the systems that were in place. And so when people talk about systemic racism, what things have been created to keep specifically Black and brown folks out of certain areas or certain ways of moving, and that it's been on and on. Like one of the things that I bring up is like the act of redlining, and where places where you couldn't buy a house if you were not white in certain areas. So you see housing being, or where people live, being dictated by these laws. And then you think about getting a loan. If you weren't able to, if your grandparents weren't able to get a loan to buy a house, then your parents don't have that house of equity passed down and down and down. Like you think about how definitely property is being a wealth that you can pass down from generation to generation. But if you don't have generations and generations of having that wealth, how do you build that wealth up, right? So little things like this. And I even think I brought this up in a conversation too, and just in terms of the arts, as we're both dancers, is you have these organizations that receive these grants, and you receive the grant, so you have the experience of having the grant, and so the next year you apply, you're like, I have the experience, and then you go on and on and on. And then you have a young group coming in who's never had that experience and can't prove or can't show the work that they've done because they're new and they've never received a grant before. And so that cycle happens again, where you're not able to receive a grant, and so next year you can't. I mean, it's just like all these little ways that these systems are set up. It's even like, I'd like to bring it up in the job. You go for a job and they're like, you have to have 3 years minimum experience in this job. And well, it's like, well, if no one ever hires me in this job, I'm never going to get that experience.
Yeah. Right?
So how do you get the job? Right. So
yeah. Oh, that's a great analogy, because that's what's happening. And it's how do I put this? It's strange to know that like these things have been happening, and like passively knowing them. I don't know what else to say. You know, kind of like we knew that things were like this, but just kind of accepting it and just being like, well, I guess this is the way it is.
It's a privilege.
Yeah.
Really.
And that's what I've been thinking a lot, because I was like, dude, I was doing a lot of that. There was a lot of me just turning away because everyone else was turning away, or the people even being like, you know, to who this is happening to are turning away. So it's just like, well, I guess this is the answer. But just being like what you said, right? Like it's kind of like an ongoing thing where no, it's not about beating yourself up, but just understanding how you have a hand in perpetuating systemic racism. You know?
And what you can do to change.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And giving up is hard for people. You know, you think about, can you give up your teaching position or your job for somebody else? Are you, how far are you willing to go, and really assessing, I think a lot of it just comes down to capitalism. We all want to survive. We all need to eat and have a house over our head. And so.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree, because it's just like, when you're, for me, listening to everything and learning, like combating systemic racism means you really have to look at different facets of your life. It can't just be talking to your mom and your grandma and your dad and your grandpa. Like that's definitely an important facet of it. Also, like where you spend your money, but also like who you work for. Erica Tarasoff came on a couple months ago, and she was talking about like business ethics, and like you should be able to ask your HR or your like employer, like, hey, what are we doing for the Black Lives Matter movement? Like, you just put out a letter saying you stand with them. So can I just ask, like, what are we doing? But like even just that for some people is really scary, because they need the money. You don't want to, when you need money, especially right now, right? COVID, because only so many people have jobs. Only so many people have jobs. And so it's just like, are you willing to risk your job? Like there's no simple right answer, because it's like, if you need that money, you need that money. But at the same time, it's just like, well, guess who's winning from the situation?
Yeah.
Capitalism.
Yeah.
Like it's just winning itself over and over, because everything is like set up so horribly, and it's so hard. It's hard.
Yeah. It is. So that's why it's like a lifelong process. It's not, at least for me, it's not like, oh, I figured it out, I'm doing it, I'm fine. Maybe others folks are getting there, but I feel like I'm learning daily and constantly checking myself, and there's a lot more work to do. And sometimes I'll often say I'm not really hopeful for change, because the same thing keeps happening and happening. So over and over again, like here we are, it's 2020, and what really has changed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, yes, like realizing all that, like even like slavery, right? Or what you like hit the point where you're like, oh, it just never ended, it just kind of changed into something else. Or
yeah, you think about the prison system.
Exactly. Right? Like, and like that's hard, because it does make you feel hopeless. But I mean, I guess that's why it's good that like more people are being born and going into it. Like we have new like ways and stuff, like we have new people coming in who have more hope. Which is funny, because I'm a newer person into activism. Like, like I've always been really, I've advocated for mental health, and that's been my thing. And right now I'm like, oh, I'm a new activist, like, and that's what it is. But it's really funny you say that, because a lot of time I struggle with hope though too. Because it's hard, and like knowing all that, and because the internet is here, it's really easy to see the history of things now, right? Like,
right, more access to information.
Yes. And even though it's like hopeless, like knowing like, well, even though there's times you feel like that, like there is hope, I look at like the kids I teach and stuff. For me, it's always looking at kids, right? Where you're just like, I might feel hopeless, but no, like I don't want them to have this life.
Yeah, I'll have to say that I am generally on the pessimistic, no hope side, but there's definitely hope being given to me. I'm feeling it through our young people. And one recently is the young Black women who organized a protest and a march to defund the police and the school systems in San Diego. And just watching them work together and putting on something gives me hope. It's like, I wish I was that active when I was in high school, in early college, So I'm seeing younger people, and like we take our kids over to these protests. So we're hoping that they're getting ingrained early on to have this mindset. And I've been doing a lot of rereading of Yuri Kochiyama, who is like one of our Asian American activist mothers, and kind of rereading about her and her children, and how her children were really brought up in this life of activism and justice, and how it was really implemented into their life. So that gives me hope too, that there's a lot of young people that are being introduced to this early on, and are doing something about it. But again, I kind of live a little pessimistically, although as happy and loving as I can be. But I did want to go back to one of the points you were making, and it's this way of thinking that I don't think is new, but I've learned it through my partner. Is there's like 4 ways of looking at things. So one is like your internal. So it's yourself. So if we think about addressing anti-Black racism, specifically in Asian American communities, right? We think about the internal, like we ourselves, right? And then the interpersonal. So me in the relationship with someone in my family or someone close to me, how am I addressing it in the interpersonal? And then we think of it as the institutional. So that could be like your job, like your job, or wherever you live in and move in. And then you think systemically, so the 4 ways. So it's like you can do a lot of the work internally, but if you're not taking it further, then you're not expanding upon it. So it's like really in these 4 ways, if we can deeply work at them constantly, like changing it. And maybe you're not ready for the real systemic change. Maybe that's a little bit hard to grasp because you haven't done a lot of the work yourself. But that's what I would encourage folks to do, is really figure out kind of all these things simultaneously. But really, we got to start with ourselves. And again, if you're defensive, and we've seen a lot of that on Facebook, on social media, where folks are really defensive about being called out. But hopefully these folks are actually spending the time in addressing that, instead of living in this like, don't call me out, I'm a good one, I didn't do that, you know. And I hope you, in the conversations you're having, that you're getting responsive, and that people are being open and receptive to what you are asking.
Yeah, it's been really eye-opening, and it's hard. Sometimes it is like disheartening, and it makes you feel more hopeless a little bit. But at the same time, it's also, you know, like remembering like that that some of the responses were great, or the people who joined in with you were great. You know, that there obviously are groups of people who are like willing to change and stuff, and like, you know, being able to hold on to that, even though you might not see it from the people in your own personal life that you want to see it from right now. But, you know, seeing that people can change. Like I was talking to Grace about this. If you guys were tuned in yesterday, Spencer Powell was here, the artistic director of Visionary Dance Theater, and his was like, he was just talking about like his anger issues basically. And to like, even though he's older, like, you know, he's been around the block now, he probably tells people he's like 30. Like, you know,
like I'm 28.
Yeah, like he's been here for a very long time, you know. And he even was just like, he talked about how like he realized that, you know, those ways of talking to your dancers and yelling in their faces and stuff like is not correct, and it's harmful. And the fact that, you know, like even though he is older, like he had that whole realization, and he's like, I'm constantly working on it every day, because I don't want that for myself. I don't want that for my personal life, you know, like that sort of like accountability, like for him at his age, like for me was super inspiring, because we always think of like older people and, oh, they're stuck in their ways, you know, like leave them alone, they're stuck in their ways, you can't change it. But that can be really harmful when those people are still alive. They vote, they talk to you, you know, they say things to you that are horrible, like, and that's really not acceptable. So things like that also make me hopeful when you're like, there is hope. I know it exists. I need to focus on that.
I mean, if you think about all the years you spent learning and then have to unlearn and relearn, it's not going to happen overnight. So not necessarily giving up on somebody because your first conversation with them turned sour and then being defensive. People will come to that place when they're ready, you know, and sometimes maybe now is not the time. But I like one of the things that I'm encouraging young people specifically now is to do the work now before it gets really personal. Do the work now when you because I think when I mean there's a lot of reasons why, but again, we have this privilege of thinking about things and spending time and making mistakes and learning and being in conversation and doing that work now, whatever that is to you. And when I think about fighting for justice, do it now, so that when it does become personal, and hopefully it doesn't, that you've been in the practice, you know what it's like. And then also beyond that, it's like, don't wait till it gets personal to be activated, because there are people that are suffering now that need the support and help of others. And that, like, as a people, as humans, we have to support and love each other.
Yeah.
You know? Like, we can't wait till like someone in our community is killed and shot by the police. We have to understand that when Black folks are shot and killed, that is our community. Those are our people. You know.
Yeah. It is really hard. Like, that is one of the things I struggle with, where, like, you know, like, I understand that for some people, until it's personal, then they don't get it. Which for me is really really difficult, because I'm like, seriously though, like, where did empathy go? You know, like, it's really hard. But then for me to focus on that is not helpful, because it's like one of those things where, you know, you taught about empathy and being nice to your neighbor and stuff like that when you're young. And then I'm having just a hard time figuring out it's not as prominent as I thought it would be as an adult. Like, realizing that has been really hard. Just like realizing that, you know, like, so much as an adult, when you're an adult and you're done with all your schooling and everything, finding out, you know, things are not as kumbaya as like you were taught. Like, things are not like all good, and racism is obviously still here. Like, that's like a conversation I've been having, like, on these like live discussions, just realizing, you know, everything that you learned at school, especially elementary school, you know, when these ideas are like coming into your head the first time, like, being basically taught that racism is gone. And then to figure out, like, through the years, that that's really not true. And then to figure out more as an adult the extent to which that was never true is really harsh. Like, it's a big old wake-up call. And it's hard to get over, but I mean, it's important information to know. And, you know.
Yeah, and I just think, like, in general, we live in a very individualistic society. I think American society is about you and you being successful, and, you know, the whole bootstraps mentality, like, you do the hard work and you get to where you go. And I think when we return to our own cultural practices and learning from other cultures, just the community aspect of it, and how, like, even thinking about how people used to live together. We live in these like single family homes, and we do our own thing, and we're very separate. And so that leads to really folks really just trying to get better and do things for themselves, as opposed to really uplifting each other, you know. And I think we have a lot of lessons to learn about figuring out what community means. And I think, like, kind of coming back to hip hop, it's like that is like some of the lessons that I've learned being hip hop. And some of the more recent discussions I've talked about is like, you go to a cipher, or you go to a club, or you go to even dance. Like I think movement is so important. And being in a space that like people get judgy, like, oh, who's that? Who they think they're best. But ultimately you're in this space and you're moving together, and there's this acceptance, and you are individual in the sense that you have your own personality, you have your own way of doing things, but as a collective, you're moving in the space. I mean, just think about a dance class, right? Doing the phrase together, everyone's moving together, feeling each other, and kind of focused on their own movement, but collectively thinking about who else is in the room. I'm not going to hit that person. If I move too far this way, I'm going to hit that person. Or if I don't move quick enough, the person's going to run into me. But like the collectivity we can learn together from being in a space together. You go into a club, and it's not like you go around and meet every person in the room, but it's like a shared experience, and everyone's feeling the music, feeling the vibe, and dancing together. And alcohol gets involved, and people get in fights and things like that. But for the most part, there's this community that happens, where you get to come and express yourself and be yourself. And so if we can tap back into, why we're drawn to certain spaces and what it provides for us, and then how we can contribute back into that space. Right? It's like, it's not always the taking. It's such a colonial colonizer method of thinking in this society. It's like, what am I going to gain from being in this space? Even taking a class, like, if I take this class, how much is it going to better my technique or my dance ability, as opposed to, by learning this, how am I going to give back? What is my participation being in here providing? It's like something that I'm really thinking about. What is my participation as an Asian American teaching hip hop at higher institutions? How am I providing something back? What do I have that I can give back? What is anything useful for me? And it flips, because sometimes I'm like, oh man, I just need to go away and do something else. But I know that I have the responsibility of education, to get folks to really think about their own selves, like kind of flip it on themselves. I also like thinking about my position and providing opportunities for others, who may not get to, like, I was on a call yesterday thinking about the ways that the systems at the university are. Like, you have to have an MFA. Well, there's no MFA. They're starting to happen now, but when I went to get my MFA, you couldn't focus on hip hop. There wasn't like an MFA in hip hop dance, right? Because there's no classes in hip hop. So how are you supposed to get that? There's no faculty members that could be a mentor for a hip hop MFA, and that's starting to change a little more and more. But I lost my train of thought. My son came in, and I was like, oh, okay. I'm not so good at multitasking these days. My brain is clouded.
Yeah, it's happening a little more, but like it's still.
I got it. So what I like to do, here I go, is for me, every class that I teach, I bring in a B-boy or B-girl to teach. I'm like, I've dabbled in breaking a little bit, but I'm by far not an expert. And so I bring somebody in, and I bring somebody into the university that would not get a job because they don't have an MFA in dance. So providing those opportunities. I know the little things that I can do to provide space, honor the artists that are out there, that are doing the work, that are important to me. And then again, just constantly educating, and then really trying to align myself with organizations that are doing the work that I believe in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to show you this. This was a gift I received just a few days ago, and it's so powerful. And I want to share this with everybody. Oh, I lost it. I'm not so good at this. Okay. So I don't know if it's going to read backwards or not, or if you're going to be able to see it.
Yes. Do work that matters. Yes.
Vale la pena by Gloria Anzaldúa. So do work that matters, and that it's, however you define that, but hopefully that the work that matters is really uplifting and working for those that are the most marginalized, using your voice and your platform. I think like this, Trixi, that you're having these conversations in a way that you can with people that you've been in community with, that can share. It's like, do work that matters, and not necessarily because you benefit from it, like you get uplifted, right?
Yeah.
So no. That's it. It's always like, oh, what's mom doing? What's the interesting? Yeah. So.
Oh, it was a good time though. We've reached our hour. I told you to go by fast.
I know. I know. And I was like, I can keep talking. I'm like, I got notes. I can keep talking.
Because it's just such a big thing to talk about. Okay, so I will ask you an ending question.
Okay.
And it can be, you can repeat things you already said, or it can be new things. But what are 3 pieces of advice that you would give to new activists?
Activist work. Well, first, I would say really look internally and address the ways that you've perpetuated things that you are wanting to work against, and like specifically anti-Black racism, right? To really look internally and start unraveling and relearning and being humbled to learn. So that is one way. And I love this. My good friend, Dr. Shamel Bell, is always about action items. Like after everything, you always have action items to go. So I'm calling in her spirit here. Here's your action item. Do the work in yourself, and then don't do it by yourself either. Be in community, right? So that you don't feel alone. You have somebody accountable for you. You have somebody accountable. You are accountable to somebody else, but also find an organization that you believe in their work and just try to show up. I think there's this idea that activism work is like you on the front lines, putting your body in a protest, but there's so many ways of being active, and sometimes it's just having that conversation with your family member. Like we talked about at the beginning, you have the Dee Dee McClure bail fund number here. You spent the time and you looked and you believe in that organization. So figure out who's running it, figure out how you can support, you're sharing it, right? That's one step. You can educate somebody who asks you about it because you actually took the time to read what they stand for and why the bail fund exists. I think there's this quick way of like reposting and hashtagging and all that without really understanding what you're sharing. So just take a little bit of time, educate yourself, read. I'm an educator. I'm going to tell you to read a lot. Read lots of things. Read bad things. And go see art. Artists are so powerful. See bad art, see good art, and really, unpack all of that. And then have conversations. That was more than 3, right?
Yes, but I like them all.
Yeah.
We'll them all.
I'm one of the co-founders for Asian Solidarity Collective. We're a grassroots organization here in San Diego. And we exist to activate our Asian American community, addressing anti-Black racism, and also being in community with our Black folks here in San Diego. So if you are interested, we are welcoming folks to be a part of our group, and you can find us online, on Facebook, on Instagram. But find people that you can do work with, and that you can move things forward. But again, always thinking about, like the quote said, do work that matters. Yeah.
Did I spell it wrong? Is it a number 4? It's a number 4, isn't it?
No. Asian Solidarity Collective.
Oh, wow. I was just really off.
Yeah.
The only excuse I can give is I'm sweating a lot.
That's okay. Yeah.
Asian Solidarity. Is it all? Is on your hat? Is your handle like all together?
Yeah, like, it's just all one word. Yeah.
For Instagram, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So.
Yay!
Yay!
The wrong things. Thank you, Grace, for being here and talking. I super appreciate it. Especially like it's cool to be like, you were my professor. And like reach back to that. So that's been really cool. Also, thank you for all the work you're doing in the community. Also, thank you for being honest and just being like, there is hopelessness sometimes. And that you're a pessimist. Like, honestly, like for me, that actually makes me feel better because I kind of sway more towards that way too. Like, I would like to say, like, I'm a very hardcore realist. But
that doesn't mean that we don't continue doing the work and believing and wanting for change. It's
exactly
just, sometimes I live there.
Yeah,
and use that as motivation.
It's refreshing to hear though, because then I also feel like sometimes you feel like you have to be a certain way to be an activist. Like you have to have that unending like energy and hope and stuff, and it's just like that just seems unrealistic, and then it kind of turns people off where it's just like it's not
really. No, but you have to really think of privilege and how like Black folks don't get to turn off racism. It's a daily lived experience, right? We have our Native folks who are have been abused over and over and over again. And I think of like kind of thinking back to Yuri Kochiyama, it's like we all have been oppressed, and it's not about who's been oppressed more and who, right? But we all know what oppression feels like, and that should bind us to want to do better. You think not even just racially, but thinking about gender, right? The oppressions of maybe what women feel, what trans folks feel, what we can go down the list, right? There's oppression everywhere, and then if you feel like you've not ever been oppressed, just like checking yourself of like, wow, I've been privileged to not ever dealt with any sort of oppression. So let me talk to folks, let me understand, and let me use my privilege in order to bring us all to a better place, even though we're unhopeful for that, right?
Hopeful enough, it's fine. We're hopeful enough because we're still doing stuff. So it's fine.
Right. And I really think like there is a way that you can get overwhelmed, where you're feeling like I can't do all of that. So really being like, okay, what am I willing to commit to, and how can I have a long commitment to this way of changing something, and really sticking to it, write it down again, being accountable. And sometimes you're tired, and you have to take a break. But again, don't think like, okay, I'm going to go be this amazing activist, and then a month later, kind of like a lot of people have been, it's like, okay, that's been too tiring, I can't keep this up. Like increments, learning, reading, stepping in when you can, really being mindful. There's a lot of talk about self-care too, and that being important, And I think of the small and the big ways that you can provide. Sometimes it's just taking a meal to somebody who's been out on the front lines, buying them dinner, right? getting a massage for them, giving them a massage. I mean, right now we can't because of COVID, so you can't be like doing all that. But you can order food and send it to somebody, right? We all need to eat, right?
Yes.
So yeah, small and big ways. Signal boosting. Like this is going on, and spending the time researching and not just sharing things because it looks cool. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And not even reading them.
Right.
Sometimes you really, you really should read everything you're posting.
Yeah.
Something might come up later down those slides that you don't agree with.
Yeah. And then again, for non-Black folks that are participating in hip hop, like do the research, understand how you live in it and how you contribute to the culture and what you're actually doing for Black culture. Those are my lots of action items.
Yay, action items! We love action items. We love when things are tangible.
Yes.
You can actually do them, and it doesn't feel like what. Again, thank you for being here. Thank you so much. If you guys want to contact Grace more, her Instagram handle is down there, Dr. Mama Grace. And also floating next to it is our donation to DD McClure's SD bailout. It's like a weird link, but it's the link. It is the link. It's just because it's like a bit.ly thing. So, that is like the link to them. Please check them out. They're not just, they don't just do bailouts just for protests. They're like an ongoing organization. They bail out Black and brown women, mothers. That was their thing. I remember seeing like their Mother's Day thing. That's how I saw them for the first time.
And it's a grassroots community grown organization. So it's not some big corporation or entity. It's like folks in our community that are giving opportunities to bail out mothers and folks that need. Yeah.
So go check them out and definitely look at your community.
Freezing.
It's like, get off. It's like you've been going on for too long. Check out those places. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back next week with
thank you, Trixi.
Different people that I can't think of right now. It's okay. It will be up on my Facebook post. Grace, thank you for joining. This has been a wonderful conversation. I definitely have things to think about, which is great. So thank you for all of that. Thank you everyone for being here. And thank you for everyone who will watch this later on in recording. Bye-bye.